But also, what was important to us is that Tex Wood is a fabrication in a way. He started out as because Andrew knew this, he started out as a member of the British elite, and he ends up reinventing himself. So we were also fascinated by how he was able to do this, and also how he was able to represent this, because he doesn't exactly hide where he comes from. He makes it into part of his persona. So he's not just a Wild West character. He's a Wild West character with a lot of learning behind him, and he presents that in his writing. And we were fascinated by how complicated that got. So that was another thing that really made this project interesting for us, but it also needed some commentary. Because the readers of his time would have got the joke, but we weren't so sure that everybody would get the joke now. So we had to do some work on that.
Yeah, there are multiple layers in these stories. There's his clearly elite public school education in Britain. He grew up in Stratford. There is dialect from Western dialect, cussin' and hosses and engines and that kind of stuff.
And we don't even know if people talked that way,
yeah,
right?
It could be just some kind of fiction that he was referring to as well.
Yeah.
The Wall Street brokers, because we know that many of his clients were Wall Street people, the bankers, the Boston Brahmins who came out here to experience wilderness, came by train. They had baths. They weren't exactly experiencing what we might think of classically as wilderness. They got the jokes, they were educated, and that was one of the reasons they came to see the wilderness with him. We know from letters in the White Archive that he was recommended to other people by his clients as a suitable guide even for family holidays because he was a gentleman. And so we see also class plays a strong role in his career, his earning opportunities, the way he structured these stories, the way he related in these stories to people from various different social classes, different ethnicities. Those things all need explication as well. Some of them are quite offensive, I think, by contemporary standards. And that's another reason why this is a scholarly book and not just a collection of stories to buy off the shelf in a Banff tourist store. Yeah. Or as he called them, snake and idol shop.
Tex Wood, for instance, doesn't have a lot of good to say about Chinese immigrants, and doesn't seem to understand what it was like for specifically Chinese men to have to live and work in Banff and contribute to the building of the parks. He makes some mockery of them. So we know a lot more than he knew about what was really going on with that immigration situation. And so that was one of the places where we really had to talk about what the context is for what Tex Wood is saying. But we didn't want to leave it out. There is a tendency sometimes in treatments of Canadian history, particularly for school children, of glossing over some of the more difficult aspects of the history of Canada, and we had no desire to do that. We think that these things should be discussed, and they should be known, and they should be talked about, and they should be placed in context, and that was really important for us. He never said he was from Canada. He tended to think of himself as a landed immigrant more than anything else. But he had something that we might want to call today critical Englishness. So he was from England, but he wanted to demonstrate that you could leave behind some aspects of your English identity, especially your upper crust problems, and that you could adapt to this new place. And if you didn't, it was really your fault, because it wasn't like it was impossible. So I think that was what he wanted to say in a lot of those stories.
He didn't present himself as an Englishman because it wouldn't have been to his advantage. And at the same time, he didn't present himself as being how a native Canadian, but rather he played with the fact that he was from somewhere else, but was, by the time he was writing these stories, certainly he was well rooted in Banff. He'd been there for 24 years when he started writing, and was a fixture in Banff. So in a certain sense, he didn't have to perform himself as something other than he was, because Banff was people like him, actually. Yeah. Banff wasn't people from Airdrie. Banff was people from all over the place, performing Western Canadianness, yes, but everyone was in drag in a certain sense, right? Yeah. It wasn't just like this guy was somehow inauthentic. Everyone was both, of Banff, Western, et cetera, but they might also be a count from Switzerland or from northern Italy somewhere.